Right, we turn to item 2, which is the election of 2 members to Legislative Council. The election process is set out in Standing Order 8.3 and the guidance note by the Speaker in Annex 2 to Standing Orders. I don't intend to read all this out, as I'm sure members will have acquainted themselves with those provisions. Members will also note that additional officers are in the chamber to assist in the recording of the vote of those members who are in attendance via Teams due to isolation requirements. I'll call on members to propose and second each nomination. Candidates will be nominated in the order in which the papers were received by the Secretary of the House, and in the absence of Mr Thomas, I will ask Mr Ashford to nominate Mr Crane and ask that one of his supporters formally second that nomination. As we only have 23 members present and voting today, and on the assumption that the technology behaves, the required number of votes to be elected is 12, as a majority of those present and voting is required. Once all of the candidates have been proposed and seconded, I will call on the clerk to run the vote, and if we don't get a result in the first round, we will move to subsequent rounds, dropping off the candidate with the fewest number of votes in each round. I hope that is clear, honourable members. I now call on Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I nominate Mr Shimmins, Mr Bill Shimmins.
Thank you. Mrs Christian.
I'd like to second that, Mr Speaker.
Thank you. Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's my great pleasure, in the absence of Mr Thomas, to nominate Mr Paul Crane.
I call Mrs Court.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to second Mr Crane.
Thank you very much. Call on Dr Allinson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's my pleasure to nominate Mrs Crowley Bentham as a prospective member of the Legislative Council.
Thank you. Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wish to second.
Now, again, Mrs Court. Sorry, Mr Glover, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I stand to propose Mrs Diane Kelsey for one of the 2 positions for Legislative Council.
Thank you very much. Mrs Court.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to second Mrs Kelsey.
Thank you very much. Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's my pleasure to nominate Mr Craig Brown.
Thank you very much. Mr Hooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to second.
Thank you. Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wish to nominate Mrs Mary Beth Cole.
Thank you. Mr Hooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to second.
Thank you. Mr Morehouse.
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Mr Connor Keenan.
Thank you. And Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It is my pleasure to second this nomination.
Thank you very much. Now, all the candidates having been proposed and seconded, I call on the Secretary of the House to run the ballot.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am now collecting votes for Mr Shimmins. I'm now collecting votes for Mr Crane. I'm now collecting votes for Mrs Bentham. I am now collecting votes for Mrs Kelsey. I'm now collecting votes for Mr Brown. I'm now collecting votes for Mrs Coll. I'm now collecting votes for Mr Keenan.
Honourable members, we have a result. With 16 votes, we have Mr Paul Crane, and with 13 votes, Mrs Diane Kelsey. May I congratulate the successful candidates and wish them well for the forthcoming 15 months. The rest of the votes will be published in due course. Can I thank all those who took part in this election? It is not the easiest thing to do, and I thank you for putting your names forward. I'll now suspend the House just for a few moments to allow members an opportunity to congratulate the candidates and ask that members stay in the chamber, but if I could please ask the successful candidates not to leave without taking an induction pack before they go. Thank you very much. House be suspended for just a few moments. Thank you. Make sure you get. Thank you very much.